The studio lights were warmer than usual that morning, or maybe it was just the tension that made the air feel thick. Faith Hill sat poised on the CBS Mornings couch, legs crossed neatly, hands folded with practiced ease. She wore a soft smile that America knew well, the kind that suggested openness and grace, but those who had worked with her long enough could sense when something deeper was stirring. The show opened like any other: laughter, light banter, a brief recap of headlines, before easing into the segment that was meant to be celebratory. Faith was there to talk about a new chapter in her life, a shift away from constant touring and into more intentional work. At least, that was the plan. Nate Burleson leaned forward with his trademark enthusiasm, nodding along as Faith spoke about balance, about learning when to say no. His follow-up question, however, landed differently than intended. He framed her recent choices as stepping back because of fear of change, fear of relevance, fear of the industry moving on. The word lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Faith's smile flickered, just for a second, before she responded gently, clarifying that it wasn't fear but focus that guided her decisions. She spoke calmly, choosing her words with care, the way she always had when navigating public conversations. But Nate pushed again, this time joking that many artists say that when they're not ready to admit they're slowing down. A few people chuckled, unsure whether they should. Faith's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. She straightened, uncrossed her legs, and placed her hands flat against her knees. Her voice remained steady as she corrected him, explaining that slowing down didn't mean shrinking, and that stepping away from noise could be an act of strength. The warmth in the studio dimmed. Behind the cameras, a producer raised a hand slightly, ready to redirect if needed, but the exchange had already found its rhythm. Nate, sensing resistance, tried to steer the moment back with humor, but it only sharpened the edge. He asked if artists like her sometimes struggled to let go of the spotlight. Faith paused. The silence stretched long enough to make viewers at home lean closer to their screens. When she spoke again, there was no anger in her tone, only resolve. She said she had spent decades being told who she was supposed to be, on stage, in interviews, in rooms where decisions were made without her. Letting go of the spotlight, she explained, was different from refusing to be reduced by it. The couch felt suddenly too small for the weight of the conversation. Nate nodded, but his next comment, meant to challenge her perspective, came off dismissive. He suggested that public figures owed audiences explanations when they made unexpected moves. Faith exhaled slowly. Her eyes moved from Nate to the camera, then briefly to the crew, as if acknowledging everyone who was part of the moment whether they wanted to be or not. She said she owed her audience honesty, not performance, and that honesty sometimes made people uncomfortable. The control room buzzed with hushed voices. Someone counted down, hoping to cut to commercial early, but the conversation had taken on a life of its own. Faith's composure never cracked, yet the firmness in her words made it clear she had reached a line she wasn't willing to cross again. She spoke about being polite when interrupted, patient when misunderstood, and grateful even when diminished. Then she said, quietly but unmistakably, that she was done doing that on live television. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Nate opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly recalibrating. Faith smiled once more, softer now, tinged with something like relief. She thanked the crew for their kindness, acknowledged the viewers watching at home, and stood. The microphone clipped to her jacket caught the faint rustle of fabric as she stepped away from the couch. Cameras stayed wide, unsure whether to follow. Faith walked off set with measured steps, not rushing, not hesitating, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any segment ever could. By the time the broadcast ended, the moment had already escaped the confines of the studio. Clips of Faith Hill standing up and walking away spread across social media within minutes, stripped of context in some places and analyzed with forensic intensity in others. Every pause, every glance, every word was replayed and reinterpreted. Viewers argued about tone and intent, about who crossed the line first and whether the line should have existed at all. Headlines grew bolder by the hour, each one trying to capture what had happened in fewer words than the moment deserved. Inside the CBS building, however, the energy was less dramatic and more unsettled, as producers quietly replayed the segment, wondering how a conversation meant to inspire had unraveled so completely. Faith was already gone. She sat in the back seat of a car moving slowly through traffic, her phone buzzing on the seat beside her. Messages poured in from friends, from colleagues, from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered support, others asked what had happened, a few advised her to get ahead of it, before the narrative hardened. Faith stared out the window instead. The city blurred past, and with it, the familiar pressure to respond immediately, to smooth things over before discomfort turned into controversy. For the first time in a long while, she resisted that urge. That evening, she went home and sat at her kitchen table long after the sun went down. The house was quiet in a way that felt grounding. She thought about the countless interviews she'd given over the years, the questions she'd answered graciously even when they stung, the jokes she'd laughed at so the moment wouldn't turn awkward. None of it felt regretful, exactly. It felt finished. When she finally picked up her phone, she didn't scroll. She opened a blank note and began to write, not a defense, not an apology, but a decision. Her statement was released later that night. It was brief, calm, and unmistakably final. She thanked CBS Mornings for the opportunity, for the team behind the scenes, for the conversations that had mattered. Then she explained that she was stepping away, not because of one question or one exchange, but because she was choosing environments where dialogue was rooted in listening rather than provocation. She wrote about protecting her voice by refusing to use it where it felt diminished. There was no accusation, no naming of names, just clarity. Within minutes, the response was immediate and intense. The next morning, the show opened with a noticeably different tone. Nate Burleson addressed the situation with care, acknowledging that the conversation had gone further than anyone intended. He spoke about respect, about learning in real time, about the responsibility that comes with live television. His words were measured, and many viewers appreciated that he didn't deflect or dismiss what had happened. Still, the absence of Faith was palpable. Her empty seat became a quiet reminder that some moments couldn't be undone with explanation alone. Public opinion remained divided, but something else was happening beneath the noise. Fans shared stories of times they'd walked away from jobs, conversations, or relationships that demanded too much silence in exchange for comfort. Musicians, actors, and writers chimed in, not always publicly, but privately, telling Faith how familiar the moment felt. She read a few messages, smiled at others, and let the rest pass by. She didn't feel the need to answer them all. Days later, Faith was spotted at a small recording studio, unbothered by the whispers that followed her name. There were no cameras, no countdown clocks, no need to fit a truth into a sound bite. She sang softly, testing new lyrics, letting her voice move without interruption. The tension that had followed her for years felt lighter now, as if it had finally loosened its grip. The clash that everyone kept replaying had become a footnote in her mind. What mattered more was the calm that came after, the quiet certainty that she had chosen herself without apology. She hadn't left in anger or embarrassment. She had left in alignment. And as the world continued to debate the moment, Faith Hill moved forward, not louder, not quieter, but exactly where she wanted to be.